All right, so imagine a geopolitical chessboard. You've got the U.S. trying to, broker peace between Ukraine and Russia. Sounds straightforward, right?
Yeah, on the surface.
But trust me, there's a lot more going on beneath the surface. And today we're going to take a deep dive into this complex dynamic using excerpts from this article. It's called Trump, Ukraine, and Russia Seeking a Deal.
Okay.
So the core tension here is this. The U.S. is in this really tricky spot.
Right.
They want to keep a good relationship with Ukraine, but they also, want to try and de-escalate tensions with Russia. It's like walking a tightrope.
Absolutely. It's a very difficult balancing act.
Yeah. And to make things even more interesting, let's talk about Trump's actions. Because on one hand, he's calling out Russia for, pounding Ukraine, and he's even thinking about sanctions.
Right.
But on the other hand, he seems to kind of get where Putin is coming from, and he's also suspended Ukraine's access to some pretty important satellite imagery. It's kind of confusing, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like he's sending mixed messages.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious about what the strategy is here. What's going on behind the scenes?
Well, I think it's important to look beyond those public statements and those actions and consider what his true motives might be. I mean, it is possible that he's trying to position himself as a neutral mediator, someone who can, publicly condemn the aggression, but at the same time acknowledge Putin's point of view. But there's a big risk here.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
Well, this approach could backfire.
How so?
It could make him look weak. It could embolden Putin. It could even make the U.S. look indecisive on the world stage, which is not a good look for a global superpower.
I see what you mean. It's not as simple as it might seem from the headlines.
Right.
There are a lot more moving parts here. So I guess the question is, what are the potential risks and benefits of this, kind of two-sided approach?
Well, the biggest risk is that it could damage U.S. credibility. Allies might start to question the U.S.'s commitment, and adversaries might, see this as an opportunity, to take advantage.
Mm.
But on the flip side, if this delicate balancing act actually works, Trump could end up being the only one who can actually broker a deal between these two sides.
So high risk, high reward situation.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the U.S.-Russia side of things.
Yeah.
But let's not forget about the U.S.-Ukraine relationship. Things hasn't been so smooth there lately.
Right.
There's been a lot of tension.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Trump publicly criticizing Zelensky for being, quote-unquote, disrespectful.
Yeah.
Then there was the whole pausing of military aid and intelligence sharing.
Right.
And then there's that whole temporary suspension of satellite imagery access. It's a lot, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, it all paints a picture of a pretty tense situation.
Absolutely. And I think that, that suspension of satellite imagery is particularly significant.
Oh, yeah. In what way?
Well, it's not just about withholding information. It's actually impacting Ukraine's ability to defend itself effectively.
Wow.
Without that real-time intelligence, they're basically fighting blind against Russian troop movements.
That's huge.
Yeah.
So what kind of message do you think that sends to Russia? I mean, is it basically saying that the U.S. is, backing down from supporting Ukraine?
That's certainly a possible interpretation, yeah. And if Russia sees this as a weakening of U.S. resolve, it could lead to them becoming more aggressive. They might feel emboldened to escalate the conflict even further.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But also beyond the immediate military implications, this raises serious questions about trust.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Zelensky has to be wondering how reliable the U.S. really is as an ally.
Yeah.
And that erosion of trust could have lasting implications for their relationship, even if things eventually calm down.
Yeah, it feels like Zelensky's stuck in a really tough spot.
He is.
He obviously needs the U.S.'s support, but he's also got to protect Ukraine's independence and, their right to make their own decisions.
Exactly. He's caught between a rock and a hard place, facing this immense pressure from both sides, both the U.S. and Russia. And he needs to find a way to get the best deal possible for Ukraine while also minimizing the risks to their long-term security.
It's a tightrope walk, for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's talk about these deals that are being, tossed around.
Okay.
Because the U.S., it seems like they want Zelensky to sign something that gives them a stake in Ukrainian minerals and also agrees to, a quick truce with Moscow.
Yeah.
But then Zelensky, he's looking for strong security guarantees for Ukraine. So it feels like everybody's at the negotiating table, but they've got very different goals in mind. I mean, what are the incentives and the pressures that each side is facing here?
Well, you have to remember that the U.S. holds a lot of power. I mean, they have a lot of financial and military might.
Right.
And they can use that to put pressure on both Ukraine and Russia. But if they push too hard, things could get really messy really fast. Russia might decide to, buddy up even closer with China, and that could destabilize the entire region even more. Plus, forcing a deal that seems unfair could make the U.S. look bad in the eyes of the international community, and nobody wants that.
So basically, the U.S. is also walking a tightrope.
Yeah, pretty much.
They've got to find a solution that works for them without alienating their allies or, making things worse overall.
Exactly. And this is where understanding leverage becomes really crucial.
Hmm.
The U.S. has its economic and military strength, but Russia has its military force and all those energy resources.
Right.
And then there's Ukraine, kind of stuck in the middle, needing support, but also determined to, control their own destiny.
It's interesting, though, because Zelensky's been trying to, smooth things over with the U.S., right?
Yeah.
He sent that apology letter to Trump, expressed his gratitude, and even proposed some concrete steps toward peace. It seems like he's trying to, walk that tightrope between keeping the U.S. on his side and also standing up for, Ukraine's right to self-determination.
Yeah.
What do you make of all that?
Well, I think it's just a pretty calculated approach. By extending that olive branch to Trump, but at the same time reminding everyone that Russia is the aggressor here, he's trying to shift the narrative. It's a pretty smart way to gain international support and put more pressure on Russia to make concessions.
It's like he's playing 3D chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
It is, but it makes you wonder,
Oh, what's that?
how much leverage does he really have in this situation?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What happens if he just flat out refuses to sign a deal that, meets all of the U.S.'s demands?
That's something I bet keeps Zelensky up at night. So we've got this incredibly complicated web of motivations, conflicting interests, and potential deals.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm getting is that understanding the leverage that each player has is really key to figuring out how this whole thing might play out.
Absolutely. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we haven't even touched on things like the international reactions, the potential consequences for global security, or the whole issue of information warfare.
Yeah, there's a lot more to unpack here.
There is. Each of these adds another layer of complexity to an already very intricate situation.
Well, I feel like we've peeled back a layer or two already.
Yeah.
And I am definitely intrigued to see what other layers we uncover as we, continue to dive deeper into this. So
Yeah.
we've got Zelensky in this really precarious position, right?
Yeah.
He's got the U.S., a super powerful ally, but they've got their own, agenda.
Right.
And then on the other side, you've got Russia, this formidable adversary with a clear military advantage. So, I mean, what are his realistic options at this point?
Well, if he just, outright refuses to sign a deal that the U.S. is happy with, he risks losing crucial aid.
Right, the financial and military support.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that would severely weaken Ukraine's position. I mean, they'd essentially be left to fend for themselves against a much stronger opponent.
Yeah. Not a good situation to be in. But then wouldn't, giving in to the U.S. demands, without those solid security guarantees, wouldn't that be just as damaging for Ukraine in the long run?
Yeah, that's the dilemma. It's a
Right.
choice between, short-term survival and long-term security.
Yeah.
And that's where Zelensky's strategic maneuvering becomes super important.
Right.
He has to thread that needle, somehow get the best possible terms, while also, protecting Ukraine's future as an independent nation.
So earlier we were talking about the international community, and there seems to be a growing concern about this whole situation,
Definitely.
especially, with that coalition of the willing forming
Yeah.
to help out Ukraine. Does that give Zelensky any more leverage when he's negotiating, with the U.S. or with Russia?
Absolutely. It changes the whole dynamic. I mean, it's not just a conversation between the U.S. and Ukraine anymore.
Right.
The whole world is watching. And there are countries out there who are ready and willing to step up and support Ukraine, even if the U.S. wavers.
So Zelensky can use that, kind of international support to strengthen his position.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, it's clear that what's happening in Ukraine is not just affecting Ukraine, right? I mean, the whole world is kind of reacting and responding to this. Are we seeing any, broader consequences starting to emerge from this whole situation?
Absolutely.
Like what?
Well, every action, every decision that these players make has ripple effects.
Right.
And those ripple effects go way beyond their borders. We're talking about, a reshaping of the geopolitical landscape. We're seeing increased military spending in Europe, heightened diplomatic tensions, not just between, the U.S. and Russia, but also between the U.S. and some of its NATO allies.